This 911 Strong podcast is brought to you by our partners at the Police Credit Union of California.
As a financial institution founded by law enforcement for law enforcement and their families over 65 years ago, they have the experience and understanding to help you with all your financial needs,
including exclusive products designed specifically for law enforcement professionals. To become a member today, visit thepolicecu.org. That's the police, the letter C, and the letter U.org.
Or call 800-222-1391 and tell them you heard about them from the 911 Strong podcast.
Station to all units.
Prepare to copy.
You're listening to the 911 Strong podcast.
Don't act like I never told you.
With Aram and Kristen, bringing you stimulating discussion.
No, I like the sound of that.
An entertaining conversation.
And now, here's Kristen and Aram.
Hey friends, welcome back to the 911 Strong podcast. With me as always is my dear friend Kristen. What's up, Kristen?
Hi, hanging in there.
Yeah, today we got a special episode. It's actually a simulcast. We're recording two podcasts in one. Joining us today from the Papa Sierra Tango Delta podcast is Larry Peyton. What's going on, Larry?
How's it going, man? Very happy to be here today.
Awesome. Hey, that phonetic spelling, if our guest didn't pick up on that, stands for PTSD.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a podcast that's hasn't been started too long ago. I've been podcasting for several years, but that was one I was not comfortable yet, I guess, admitting my own issues with.
Sure.
And so when I finally decided it was time to step up, yeah, I just wanted to be there for the brothers and sisters that are also struggling and have the same fears.
That's awesome. I can't wait to get into that because Kristen is a peer support counselor, and I actually sought some help, some therapy recently. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But another interesting thing for our listeners about Larry is from Canada. He is a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer, and I recently learned what the difference was between the Mounties and other municipal police officers out in Canada. So we'll get into that too. And for your listeners, Kristen and I work for an agency in Los Angeles County in California in the United States. So I'm sure for your listeners, we're going to have a bit of some revelations for them too, because the way we operate in America is a little bit different than Canada. So
yeah, just a bit.
Yeah. So we'll get into that and a lot more, but let's first benefit our listeners with some interesting facts about Larry. You've been doing police work for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, so I will, come the end of next month, have 21 years completed. We'll be working on year 22. Been posted all throughout the country from the west right back over to the east. A lot of history. I've done patrol work, and my first posting was a small town in Alberta. I did that for 4.5 years. Then I was with a specialized drug unit in Calgary, Alberta. Then I went with Customs and Excise, which was located in Ottawa. And now I'm in Halifax with NWES, which is a weapons enforcement support team.
That's awesome. I mean, you've done it all, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So I recently learned, because my impression of a Mountie was, the old Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons, right?
Right.
I thought Mounties were more of a, like a figure piece, like a symbol of Canada. I didn't realize that you guys were special police. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the difference is?
Yeah. So, I mean, the RCMP is a very old organization. It actually began just as a march west to try and quell some of the issues that were coming on from Americans coming up and taking over in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So it became the Northwest Mounted Police. Their job was just to go out west and take care of that area. It eventually got royal assent, became the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. And when there was a Dominion Police that were stepping back from work due to issues in terms of pay, in terms of hours. And at that point, the government stepped in and said that the Royal Northwest Mounted Police would take over, and it would become a federal police force across the country. We eventually became known as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, since we were no longer just out west. And now the RCMP is a national federal agency, a provincial agency, and also a municipal agency. So we can be posted anywhere from a small town working alone to an anti-terrorist group.
Wow,
and pretty much everything in between.
Right. So you guys are feds, what we would in America call the feds.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what my dad always says too. He was a Muni. That's what he just said. The feds. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We do it all, man. Absolutely, though. Yeah, so it would be the same thing as a state trooper for you guys. That's what we would do. A highway patrol guy. That's what we would do. A beat cop. That's what we do. Yeah.
So you do it all.
Do it all, yeah. Which is, you know what? So what I love about it is that it's given me a lot of options in terms of my career.
Right.
You know, as I said, I've gone to. I've never done the same job twice. I've gone from patrol right up through some specialty sections, and the development of expertise has been phenomenal. The training's been phenomenal. The opportunities have been phenomenal, and just the moving across the country has been great. So, yeah, it's truly been quite a career so far.
So do you actually wear the uniform, the red?
Yeah, not every day at work. But
okay.
Yeah, so
but you have,
typically
special occasions.
Yeah, typically for me these days, my unfortunately my red tunic only goes on during funerals.
Sure.
So that's kind of that. But I mean, I've got right next to me here. It's just funny. I have an old picture of myself. So this was taken back in 2004, 2005, I think, when Tampa Bay was playing Calgary in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And so it was a picture we got with Don Cherry. But I am the guy would be right there.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you can see sort of that would be our ceremonial dress.
Okay, so
Very
like
cool.
our Class A's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Very cool. So
Aram, tell us about you, buddy. And I want to hear. Listen. You know, it's amazing talking to you, just in the sense that you have been doing your podcast for quite a while, doing some amazing things with brothers and sisters down there. I want to hear. This morning I took time to listen to an episode that you guys had recently done with an officer. I believe it was in Georgia who had passed away. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago. Was it? Maybe 3 years ago now. Yeah. Anyways, talking with his widow, which was very, very moving. But tell us about how it is you're taking on discussions and podcasts like that, and with the charity work that you're doing.
Yeah. So Kristen and I work for a municipal agency out in Los Angeles County. She's a dispatcher. She's one of the senior dispatchers at my station, and I'm a detective bureau sergeant. Her husband and I worked patrol together for a long time. He's a corporal on the SWAT team. He's the lead on the sniper team. And we carpooled to work for years because we worked on the same team. So we would have these awesome discussions. And because both of us had a presence, Kristen and I both had a presence on social media, we were like, one of these days, our conversations have to land on social media, because I think what we discuss is real. It's raw. It's not filtered. And I think people want to hear that. So, podcasts were a thing. It was an emerging thing. And I think at one time we tried to do a live discussion during our carpool. We were like, let's just put our discussion live and see what happens. And people gravitated toward it. They loved it.
Yeah.
And, we just, I don't know, Kristen, I think collectively we both invested maybe $1,000 into equipment and time. And we put something together. We didn't know what we were doing. We hired a photographer so we can get some pictures. And
nice.
We had a 3-camera setup, which was just a lot of editing, but we did it.
Wow.
And our opening week, we debuted in the top 100 in the U.S. charts, right under the Gary V podcast. Gary V was number 16 and we were number 17. So breaking into the top 1,000 was an accomplishment, then the top 100, and then making the top 25. And then the momentum just kind of kept going. We kept putting out episodes. We got out of the top 25, I think, just as fast as we got in. But we've maintained being the top 200 not only in the United States but in Canada too. So
Exciting.
I'm real excited to actually speak to someone from Canada, especially because our audience is up there too. But I don't know, Kristen, we have audience members from Costa Rica, Italy, France, the most obscure countries. But yeah, I don't want to take up this whole introduction, but Kristen, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just a little bit, I guess, about me. He mentioned my husband. So I've been dispatching for a little over 23 years now. And another thing that kind of works for our podcast, giving different like perspectives, is I grew up in law enforcement. So like my dad, my grandpa, my uncle, all of us were in law enforcement, and I kind of fell into it. So now I have the perspective as a daughter growing up in it, and being married to a husband that's in it, and then, you know, having my own kids, obviously. And so just completely immersed in law enforcement, so I can kind of give different, you know, perspectives of the wife and kid and worker. So
I think it's phenomenal as well, Kristen, because, I mean, a lot of people tend to understand the impact it can have on members, but really disassociate from what it's like being on that line as a dispatcher.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I mean, yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was kind of neat. I was just very fortunate enough to be sent to the FBI quarters in Quantico and just get trained with resiliency and wellness with me and another civilian, because they actually saw the impact that the calls we listened to had on us, and that they needed a civilian presence to go out and teach that to other departments. And so a quick way of just putting it is like saying, if you're reading like a really good book and you're just like really immersed in it, and then as soon as like, I don't know, something tragic happens, they rip out the rest of the book, and then you start reading the next one. So you never really know what's going to happen. Or, you know, to put it in different perspective, a movie, it's the same kind of thing. It's like right when something tragic is going to happen, or right after, they just pull the plug. And so a lot of us don't always have that closure, and those like calls sit with us for the rest of our lives and careers, some of them.
Yeah. I can understand that.
Yeah. What's interesting about what Kristen left out was her and her partner they were the first ever civilian dispatchers to ever go through the FBI Academy to teach this.
Amazing.
So, her dad was actually my chief, who promoted me to corporal, my first promotion ever at the department. So, we have a history together, and I think that's what makes our podcast work. There's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of law enforcement related podcasts, but I think that we bring a unique perspective in the sense that we have two different perspectives. We have one that is of the dispatch world, and we have a lot of audience members that are in that world. But not only is she a police wife, she's a police daughter and police granddaughter as well. Wow. Her brother was a police officer too. And now her cousin just recently became a police officer at our agency. So, having that kind of lineage gives you a different paradigm, but a different perspective as well.
Absolutely.
So our audience is made up typically of police officers, police wives, police spouses. But we have a significant number of people that aren't police that want to learn about that. And what better way to learn about it than through the perspective of someone like Kristen?
Concur. Yeah. Well, where are you going to get more perspective than from Kristen, in all honesty? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And me, I'm just kind of the sidekick. I've been doing the job a little while, so I can provide that perspective. But it's not any different. My appeal to the show is the other cops listening. They tend to be on the same level. They understand when I say something, they're like, okay, I'm that guy. Okay. But it's worked, and our social media has benefited from it. Kristen's had opportunities to be on covers of magazines, and been on other. She was on some really big podcasts. Well, I think the guy
Anthony Padilla.
He's Padilla.
So he kind of caters to, I think, kind of the teens to the 20s kind of age group, and he just interviews everybody from all different walks of life and just asks them a bunch of questions. So he happened to ask about dispatchers, so that was really cool.
Yeah, it opens us up to a bigger audience and gives people a person to be relatable to, and I think Kristen does a great job of that. And our show, we're in our fourth year of the podcast. Our first 2 years were a struggle because we were doing it for free. And but now we've got some sponsors, and we have a title sponsor that makes it very worth it for us. So yeah, I think we've finally broken into the legitimate podcast world. I think some of the other podcasts that were out there were like, okay, well, let's see if these guys will make it. And we've made it. So
I think you've showed them up. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's awesome.
Yeah. We're actually talking about some of the, before you joined on, we were talking about some of the differences between the United States and Canada. And we were actually wondering, are civilians able to carry guns in Canada?
No.
Wow.
That's what I thought. I thought they just recently outlawed it, right?
That is crazy.
That's not just recently been done. So
okay.
no, there's no firearm. So there are firearm possessions. The firearm laws here are broken into what's considered non-restricted, restricted, and prohibited. So without getting too deep into it, non-restricted are essentially your hunting rifles or shotguns.
Sure.
Restricted, again, without getting too much into it, are handguns, but handguns only of a certain barrel length. Once that barrel length goes down below, I think it's 105 millimeters for us, so probably 4 inches for you guys, then it becomes prohibited. Or if it's a 25 or 32 cal, it's prohibited. There's been recently a huge change in laws up here that rifles like AR-15s were restricted. So to being restricted just means it has to be registered to you as opposed to a non-restricted, like say a 308 bolt action. Because of a mass shooting, well, I shouldn't say because of a mass shooting, but there was a mass shooting up here. It's something that was being looked at for a while, was whether or not these firearms should be taken from the restricted and moved to the prohibited category. And now they've been prohibited, which in Canada, the prohibited license is no longer being offered. So kind of, if you do the math on that, that means that if you have a prohibited license, you can never pass it on. And when everyone eventually passes away that has a prohibited license, there will be no one in this country who is allowed to legally possess a prohibited firearm, which now includes an AR-15, some of the Swiss arms that can easily be converted over to full auto, a 32 cal, a 25 cal pistol under a 4-inch barrel. Yeah, so it's much more controlled up here. However, I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't have problems with them either.
Sure,
We're seeing the same things that you are in terms of the ghost guns, the 80% receivers, the 3D printing. I mean, the reality is that if someone wants to get their hands on a gun, there's a way they can get their hands on a gun.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that's the battle we're having down here. And I know Kristen's going to chime in a bit because she's a gun carrier. And before I get into some of the laws that we have down here, I'm curious, what is the sentiment up in Canada like here? If you tell us we can't have guns, there's going to be some fighting going on.
Right.
But like if someone like Kristen were to be in Canada and say, no, I like my AR, I like my pistol, would she be looked upon as a weirdo, or is that?
No, I would say it's actually very polarizing. There is certainly a firearms community. I am a firearms owner. I own an AR-15 that I'm now waiting to just see what's going to happen on. Apparently, there's going to be a buyback from the government's willing to buy back those firearms that they've switched from restricted to prohibited.
So you can't, as a police officer, have an AR-15.
I will not be able to. The only AR-15 as a police officer I'll be able to have would be a duty issued one, not a personal one.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Goodness gracious! Wow.
Yeah.
That's mind blowing.
Right. It's completely different, but there is a very big gun community, firearm community here that wants. They do appreciate, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but there is an appreciation for control, but then there's concerns about that control being overarching with especially some of the recent changes. So, and again, the other side of it, Aram, is that you're going to have people as well that really have no time for guns, don't want them to be in any part of the community. Sure. Would like them to be gone completely. So, yeah, up here it's just polarizing. Kristen wouldn't be seen as a weirdo in one place, but in the next one, kind of like another American that's got lots of guns, and right.
Yeah.
But I understand down there as well. I mean, it was an amendment right. And as much as you kind of go, well, the amendments were prepared when there were single shot muskets, the ideology behind it is that it was to prevent an overrunning again from the government because of what happened during the American Revolution. And now it's, the ideology is, well, if the government can have this, then how can I protect myself if I have a single shot black powdered musket.
Yeah, and that's essentially part of the nutshell. And the other part of the nutshell is it was the new frontier. People settled in the East Coast, and as they ventured out west, they needed to find ways to protect themselves, and they homesteaded essentially. And other people were like, well, I actually like your creekside property. I'm going to take it from you. And, the argument that it was musket versus musket was true, but now musket versus musket is AR-15 versus AR-15. You got to fight fire with fire. So I think that's why they left the specificities out of it and said, they didn't say all Americans have the right to bear a musket, bear arms, knowing that there was going to be some modifications and changes. And if you ever watch the show Yellowstone or any of its other, 1923, you see that there were some real battles, and it wasn't against the government. It was against
you're right.
Your neighbors.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
So what ruins it for everybody, and I'm sure this occurred in Canada, was it wasn't the responsible gun owners. It wasn't the ones that bought guns to protect themselves or for sport. It was the ones that decided that they wanted to take advantage of another or be an idiot, and that they ruined it. It's always the few that ruins it for the masses, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. We had in 2020, just after things got locked down with COVID, it was in April 19th, there was the worst mass shooting up here that's ever happened in Canada. And that really changed things. I mean, we see what happened south of the border. We've had our share, but nothing to the magnitude that you guys have down there. And then you sort of start, again, basing, well, what's happened in other countries where Australia had a massive, mass shooting, and they banned guns. And now, the problem seems to be minimalized compared to what it used to be. But does that necessarily mean that's the right thing to do for other places? Well, I mean, not necessarily.
It's interesting looking at Australia, right? Because they're isolated. They're an island, essentially, and they don't have borders like we do between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, where it's easy to sneak in guns. But what you don't hear are the mass stabbings that occur too, right? Shootings are a sexy thing. Nobody really wants to put stabbings on the news, but they occur far more often than the shootings do. It's just there's no agenda behind it, so you can't ban kitchen knives.
No, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. Can you imagine if we all go to plastic?
Right. But I've seen plastic do damage too.
Yeah, but even then you can make a shank or something.
Right, yes,
exactly.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
And that's exactly right, because I worked in a jail for 5 years. I started my career as a deputy sheriff in Los Angeles County, and I was assigned to Men's Central Jail, which out this way is one of the most notorious jails in the country. And they'll take apart, people ask, how did they get metal? Well, they're ingenious. They have nothing to do, all day, these inmates, but to think of ways to manufacture items. And I'll tell you, too, because I don't know if your Canadian audience or our American audience, for that matter, may have known this, but I've seen two of the most ingenious inventions occur in the jail. One of them was a saw made out of cotton.
What?
So, if you've got all the time in the world, friction will cause micro cuts and abrasions. So what they'll do is they'll take threads from their bed sheet and make a coarse rope, like a tiny threaded rope, and they'll just rub that all day long against their bunks, metal bunks, and eventually causes a small scar and fissure, and that fissure turns into a cut, and that cut turns into a slice. And so they'll take that, and then because our ground's concrete, they'll take that metal piece and grind that into the concrete until it turns to a sharp point. That's one of the items that we call a jailhouse shank. And one of the other ingenious ideas was, this is the reason why hot water was one of the reasons why hot water is not allowed in the boiling water is not allowed in jails. So they banned boiling water in the prison cells because they used to throw boiling water on the guards and officers. But one of the other things they did was they would take the sugar packets, because they were allowed sugar packets in their morning coffee. They would save them, make sugar water using the boiling water, and then dip toilet paper or some sort of pliable material through that, and then hang it so that it crystallizes into a hard candy with framing, and they'll sharpen that into a shank.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's a one-time use shank, so it's pretty ingenious. But like to Kristen's point, when there's a will, there's a way. They'll make a weapon out of anything. I don't care if back in the Stone Ages it was stones.
Well, yeah, and I mean, so that brings you right back full circle in terms of the firearm conversation. And yeah, I mean, if ultimately if the will is there, there'll be a way. You know, it just comes down to in terms of, I guess, what, I don't know, is it making things more difficult for people? I can't speak to what the ideology is behind it. I don't know. I mean, ever since I can remember, there's been some form of gun control here. I mean, it happened well before my birth, and I'm not young, but it's continued, and it's something that will continue. Certainly, it appears to be, as new changes have come in. I mean, right now, some of the newer ones were that handguns can no longer be sold, can no longer be transferred. So if you were a handgun owner, you can maintain that, but you cannot sell it off, or you cannot go purchase another one. You can't import them. You can't bring them across the border. I mean, you couldn't bring them across the border illegally, but you can't. Essentially, whatever handguns are in this country are in this country. The downside about that was, when that became announced, there was, I'm going to say, probably a 6 to 8 week period between it being announced and it actually coming into law. Handgun sales here went crazy.
Oh, yeah.
My Lord. They skyrocketed like you wouldn't believe. You would have places that had, you know, shelves and shelves of glass shelving of pistols that were now down to, you know, an M&P 9 and a Pieta revolver. It's like, that was it. Nothing. And that's the other side of what's happened now too, is the market flooded. So you can't get guns anymore, but you've got to kind of wonder, well, what was the need for someone to go buy 7 handguns? I don't know. I mean, it becomes interesting. And the other side of it now is that person who owns 7 handguns, when they pass away, what happens? I mean, the ideology is someone should go get them, but can that always actually occur? I mean, will they have the opportunity then to be, obtained domestically as criminals?
So where does the average citizen in Canada buy a gun? Like you said, there are gun stores where, are there gun stores?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so next time you come out and visit us here in LA, Kristen and I are going to take you to one of our favorite gun stores. You have to, Kristen, you actually have to go there soon, don't you?
Yeah, so I don't know how your guys' Valentine's work, but with my husband, he likes to gift me guns. So
nice.
I got a new SIG P365.
Oh,
and,
wow.
I want a new grip on it. So my hand's a little bit smaller, and I need one that has I'm not a gun word person, so I need more like grooves and a thing to rest my thumb on. So
like a hold. It's a hold kind of a grip. Yeah. It just that way, when you go and actually put your hand right onto the grip plate, your hands are exactly where they need to be, and it's more form fitting. Yeah.
So I have smaller hands, so so we like to go down to our store called ProForce, and it's all specifically for first responders, including dispatchers.
Nice.
We could take a friend that isn't, but it's primarily for first responders. So we have to head down there and hook me up.
Next time you're down here, because I'm sure I don't think you've had an opportunity to go to a first responder only gun shop. So out here, we have sporting good. We call them sporting goods shops. Anybody can go to a Bass Pro Shop or what are they, Cabela's? I don't know what they call them up in Canada, but
Cabela's.
Cabela's. You can go in and purchase your gun. But just like I don't like to go to public ranges, I like to go to private ranges where I know people know what they're doing. I like to go to ProForce because ProForce is, you have to badge your way in. They won't let anybody go in unless you're a guest. So my wife, who's not affiliated in law enforcement other than the fact that she's a police wife, can go in along with me. And not only do they have the best prices because they're a Glock Blue Ribbon dealer, they sell in volume, but they have people there that know what they're doing. They go out of their way to hire ex-military, ex-law enforcement, people that know guns. Because I've been to some of these sporting goods shops and I've asked for, someone like Kristen's going to come in and say, "Hey, I need this thing for my hand," and they're going to be like, "Well, I don't know what that is," but you say that, you make noises, you make sign language, they'll understand what you're talking about. So, our listeners, they've heard us talk about ProForce for a long time. ProForce, they're a friend of ours on the 911 Strong podcast. So if anybody visits the Orange County, Los Angeles area, please make your way down to ProForce down in Brea. Let them know that the 911 Strong podcast sent you, and they might hook you up with a little deal.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice. And you be careful what you ask for, Aaron, when you say, when I come down to visit, because, I mean, that will happen.
You know, I knew in the first 10 minutes of talking to you, Larry, that you could be a guest at my house anytime.
Nice. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Shyness is something that I've never had, unfortunately. That boat sailed away long ago. But
Aram either.
Right? That's great. I love it.
So you're in the East Coast. You're in Are you in Nova Scotia?
In Nova Scotia, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about Nova Scotia. Is it like a metropolitan area, or is it rural?
So it currently is snowing outside in Nova Scotia today.
It is out here too.
Yeah, right.
No, it is.
We're getting a dusting.
Yeah.
Oh,
I live at 3,000 feet. I live about an hour away from LA. Actually, an hour and a half, 75 miles away from LA. For a reason, but where I live, we call it the California high desert. So we'll go in the summer and reach 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I couldn't tell you what that is Celsius, but it's really hot. It's really hot. And then we get to freezing like we are. So we've had snow for the last couple of days here where I live. And people just trip out because they think Southern California, they think sun all the time, but it's not. We get weather.
Yeah. I mean, do people know how to drive in it out there? I know in British Columbia on the West Coast here, when they get snow, it's just a gong show. Like it's, whoa.
That's a good way of putting it.
Not snow. Yeah. No, it's snowing here today, but we've had an interesting winter. We haven't had much snow this winter, so it is today. But Nova Scotia itself is a beautiful province on the East Coast. Like any other province or state, we've got bigger cities and a lot of very small areas, very small towns, villages, hamlets. There's a lot of coast.
What's a hamlet?
Smaller than so you would have a town, you would have a village, and I know hamlet is a word that was typically used when I was out in Alberta, but something even smaller. So I couldn't tell you what the size is, but it's small. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of people that live in a hamlet.
Now, do you speak French or Quebecois?
No, I can muddle my way through reading it, but that would be an absolute insult right now to the French people of my country if I tried.
Okay. so like the French, am I correct in saying like the French speaking population in Canada is akin to like the Spanish speaking population here in California?
Yeah, you guys. I mean, I would presume with the exception that a lot of the eastern part of Canada that was populated hundreds of years ago were mostly by English and French. So there's been a huge French, population in this country for a long time. Very much so that would be in New Brunswick. Here's something for you might be kind of interesting. In New Brunswick, they're known as Acadians or Acadiens. And so there was a while ago a very bad incident where the Acadiens were forced out of New Brunswick and shipped off down to what was believed to be inhabitable land in a place known now as Louisiana. And when they said they were Acadiens, the people of the South understood that to be Cajun. And that's where you get your Cajun French.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
That's neat. I've never heard that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's you get your Acadian, you get your French down there. That came from a lot of New Brunswick up here, but it was along the northern coasts on the east side of Canada. So there's a huge French population here. Yeah. The difference would be certainly in the cities in Quebec and in New Brunswick. There's a lot of English speaking people, but there are people in Quebec as well that do not speak a lick of English, that they're completely French. Yeah. So, it's a big part of the country. And we've got 2 recognized languages on account of it. So to be a member of the RCMP, you can be unilingual in either one of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we consider the people in the South, like down in Louisiana, non-English speaking as well.
My brother lives down there now, so I'm a huge LSU fan as a result.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I get down there. There is nothing like in some NCAA football. It's quite amazing.
It's funny as we're having this conversation. There's so many differences between Canada and America. I mean, just in the foundational differences. But when it comes down to the people, we're all really the same, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I think that we're probably more likely to say we're sorry for something.
Yeah, that doesn't happen in California.
No.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, I
yeah.
seen someone recently holding up a sign though and said "sorry, not sorry," which I thought was actually pretty good for Canada. Pretty interesting, right? Yeah.
So my wife's best friend, Kristen, you know her, Bronwyn. She lives up here now in California, but she grew up in Saskatchewan and part-time in Alaska. Her dad was, I forget his first name, but his last name was Johnson. But he was a champion Iditarod racer for generations.
Wow.
Like nobody could beat him. And he unfortunately passed away early. When he wasn't racing, he was delivering mail on his bobsled, and his dog team went through some ice, which everybody thought was suspicious because good dogs avoid thin ice. Great dogs like him would definitely avoid thin ice, and they thought it might have been set up or something. So the BBC had done the CBC had done a documentary on his family while he was at the height of his career, and you see little Bronwyn feeding the dog salmon and all that stuff. But she tells me all the time about how in Saskatchewan especially, it's a different way of life out there, hunting moose for food. And so, when I think about stuff like that, I think that's how the American frontiers frontiersmen were. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the reason why guns were so ingrained in culture. You always had guns. You needed it to survive. And so it's just funny how, and maybe politics has a lot to do with it, how at some point, two countries that border each other that are very similar in the way we were formed split off to having very different views on gun control.
That is very interesting. I mean, I would think that you will certainly see more of the gun owners and, I don't like the term, but fanatics that would be out west, which you sort of wonder if there's not something that just came up through the fact that there was a lot of Americans that came across the border and colonized those areas. Whereas on this side, Ontario, Quebec, and East, very, very old compared to, again, where you are. I mean, you guys can have streets that's like first, second, third, because there's actually a plan that was there for that city. Whereas if you come visit Nova Scotia, or I'm from Newfoundland, it's my birthplace, it's very confusing to drive because the houses were put there first and then the streets were built around what was there. So the point I'm just trying to make is you're dealing with such an older place here versus a different ideology out west, generally speaking. Then throw in the size of the country, which is no different than what you guys. I mean, people from Louisiana are quite different than people from, Spokane, Washington, or California to Boston even. I mean, it's people. It's just a huge country that a lot of other places don't deal with those things because they're significantly smaller.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, it's just different ideas. Aram, I loved, so my podcast deals specifically with trying to make PTSD more palatable, I suppose, for lack of a better term. People are afraid to step out and talk. People are afraid of repercussions, of stigmas, of stereotypes, just generally afraid, which is it's an interesting reality based on the fact that a lot of people who have it are first responders, military, dispatchers, nurses, people who are generally warriors that have seen some of the worst and now struggle with being able to come out and say something about PTSD. I know there's a suicide epidemic in this country, and certainly there is down there as well. If you could tell my listeners what happens down there, how is the mental support for officers in the U.S.? Are you guys getting training at the ground level? Is time being taken to actually reach out to people? Are the support services established enough? And more importantly, I guess, why is it that you think that so many are unfortunately making that ultimate decision to end the day?
Yeah, I think Kristen is the authority on the subject, but I just, before I let her chime in, I think based on my experience, there's a stigma associated with asking for help, especially, we're a male-dominated profession, and in this profession, the males kind of influence the culture. And it's not just California. Law enforcement in America in general is, if you get a wound, you rub some dirt in it and move on. There's no crying in law enforcement. Hey, buddy, I need to talk to you. Don't get weird on me. That's the kind of response you used to get. And we've gotten so far away from that. And Kristen can attest to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's still that stigma, and it's going to be around for a while. I think, in my opinion, with my experience, it's usually the older generation that has that mindset. And I don't want to say unfortunately, but unfortunately, they're the ones that are either approving or disapproving getting peer support started. And some might just be saying yes to it because it's just a checkbox, because it's now a popular item that's being talked about. And so they just want to say, hey, we have it. And then they let the program suffer and fail. And it's looked at as a joke in a lot of departments because they're not doing anything with it. I think that some of the larger departments, it makes it harder. Like I know NYPD, unfortunately, they have a really good peer support program, but they're losing a lot of people to suicide as well.
Right.
Our department, we're a lot smaller, and we had a few tragedies recently within the last, more than 6 months now. And we just happened to have a peer support established, and we had just gone and started like asking for people to support it and what the reasoning was behind it. And then I think a month or less than a month, we had 2 of our guys killed.
Wow.
So I think that kind of nailed it home, like how much it's needed, because we had peer supporters from all over our county come and like help us within a few hours of our tragedy. So I do know that there's people going and talking to peer support, to clinicians. I know Aram has, I have, and we kind of let other people know just to kind of give them permission, like, hey, I'm open about it. And I think the more people talk about it, and the newer generation that's okay talking about it, eventually it'll start shifting that way, but it's just going to take a lot of time.
Takes time. Yeah.
Hey, Kristen, do you want to talk a little bit about like some of the recent stuff? The 2 things that come into my mind that would have made me quit dispatching. Kristen was working the dispatch center when her husband was involved in a shooting.
Wow.
Shortly after that, he was involved in another shooting. And then, as she mentioned, 8 months ago, she was working the dispatch center when we lost 2 of our officers on the same call due to a shooting.
Wow.
A lot of people think when they think PTSD in the police department, they think of the officers. But you want to tell us from your perspective, Kristen, like what your mindset is? And
Sure. So obviously I know like what the dangers are, but I think we get complacent, and I really don't think it'll happen here, right? So my husband got into his first shooting, and I took the phone call, and then you hear the shots and him yelling in the background, and that kind of sat with me and frazzled me a bit. But then I kind of recovered okay, knowing he was mentally okay and he was physically okay. And then I had another guy ram the back of my husband's patrol unit. I wasn't working, so I had to wake up to the phone call of, hey, I'm okay, but this guy basically tried to kill me with his car. And then he had a third shooting, and he was okay there, so I was okay. And then we had our guys go, and I was on the radio. So I'm still struggling with the guilt, but I'm the one who sent them there. So I started the domino effect in my head. So my heart says one thing, my head says the other, and it's really hard to let that go. So I'm still trying to work through it. I went to a clinician. I did regular therapy. I did EMDR, and now I'm going to go back and do regular therapy again. And then just recently, I have my good days and bad, and it comes and goes. The week I got back after the shooting, we had another officer-involved shooting in the neighboring city. And so my fear is what am I going to do? Am I going to freeze? Am I going to just run out of the room? Like, am I not going to be able to do my job? So luckily I called my husband because he was working, and I'm like, hey, go get the Bearcat. There's an officer-involved shooting. He's down. Go get him. And so I didn't freeze, but at the same time, I'm hearing on the radio that they're taking bullets, and I'm freaking out. And I started tearing up in there. I still kept doing my job, but it took me immediately back to our shooting. And then just recently, we had another big fight, and the 2 officers involved, I didn't hear from them. And we just had the helicopter kept saying, they're fighting. They're still fighting. And working in law enforcement, when you're going to help somebody, that silence just literally is like eating away at you.
Yeah.
And not hearing my guys talk, it again took me back to me not hearing my guys that were shot. So I'm starting to get anxiety and stress, and my heart's dropping into my stomach. And then my husband was working that day too, and he put out the code 4, but he wasn't involved, so I still didn't hear from those officers. So that just kind of ripped open the wound all over again. So it's just a work in progress, but I'll be honest, I don't want to dispatch anymore. It's been like 23 and a half years, and I'm over it. I don't want to do it, and if I'm being completely honest, I don't want to be a part of sending anybody to a call that they're not going to come back from, because that guilt sucks.
So for what it's worth, I am so genuinely appreciative that you were that honest. And there's a lot of people that feel the same way. I'm struggling with that now. I've been off since the first week of December. And it's as soon as I feel like I'm starting to find myself again, it doesn't take much to bring back kind of those feelings. And I call it, it's shitty to feel shitty. It's just you hate to feel those things. And it's so many emotions that can't be put in. It's overstimulated, overwhelmed, but depressed, but anxious, it's difficult. And I agree with you. I'm not at this point. I would prefer to not. I'm very, very proud of what I am. I'm very proud of the people I've worked with, the organization for which I've worked, my employer. Very proud to be an RCMP officer at Mountie. My dad was a police officer for 30 years, municipal with the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. Likewise, it's kind of like the family business. Absolutely, very proud. However, I'm also tired, and I'm tired, and that's kind of where I am with this. And I sort of want to bring it around, and this can come back to you, Aram, because Kristen made a comment. She just used a word that is very big in terms of law enforcement, and the word she used was complacency. And so I'd like to get your input on that fine line as an officer out on the street between complacency and being fully alert. And the reason I say is that we always go, never be complacent. The other side of it is, it's absolutely exhausting being fully alert all the time. And you really, I find when you get a little bit older in service, you manage to figure out that line of where you can ease back a little bit, however, know as well when you need to generate it. Your thoughts on, the line between complacency and being ready to go?
Yeah, I think you bring up a valid point of it being exhausting. We call that hypervigilance, hyper-awareness. You may not realize it. The average person may not realize it. The average police officer who's starting out in their career may not realize it until they're told that this is what it is. So this is what it is. You're patrolling in the street. You're in a car. You're actively just being proactive. You're out there, and your eyes are moving. Your ears are moving. The hairs on the back of your neck are moving. That's just being hyper aware, and that's being hyper vigilant. You're anticipating the unknown, right? And that in and of itself, you're not physically moving, but all your senses are moving at 100 miles an hour, or kilometers an hour for your Canadian folks. But
much slower.
Yeah,
much slower, 100 kilometers an hour.
So, but the point is, everything's moving at a rapid pace, much more rapid pace than it would if you were at home or at a safe place, right? For me, I work in an office. I supervise a detective bureau. Half the time, I don't even have the gun on my hip; it's in my drawer because I know I'm going to be sitting in my office. But when I'm on the street, it's completely different. My senses have to be super aware. I might be responding. We're one of those agencies where you don't have time to be proactive because you're responding. You're being reactive. We're going from call to call. So you're in a situation where you really can't be complacent. You're always turned on. So I think some of the places that you run into where you might find officers that become complacent are the ones that have time on their hands. When you're out there, you know what? Today I think I'm going to go to Tim Hortons, and I threw that out there because I know that Tim Hortons is a place up there, or for down here Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
And you're focused on picking out which donut you want. You may not be aware of the person that's going to walk in the store behind you that's getting ready to hold the place up. And that happens, unfortunately, in places with less activity. In busy places, complacency happens in the form of taking shortcuts. So let's just say you're on a pedestrian check, and instead of putting your suspect in a safe position and you putting yourself in a position of advantage, you just want to get through the call. So that kind of complacency occurs for areas where it's even busier. You just take shortcuts. So somewhere in between not being active and taking shortcuts because you're too active, officers have to be aware that
like that. Yeah.
you got to be turned on. And where we work 12.5-hour shifts. It's a very compressed schedule. It's a lot of hours in the day. And it's a lot of time to be turned on. It's a long time to be turned on for that long. So by the time we get to our 3 days, we're exhausted mentally and physically, and we have our 4 days to recover. And a lot of people, the average American has 2 days off, and they're thinking, wow, you have 4 full days. Well, I'll tell you what, one of your days off is devoted to being at court. The other day off is devoted to working overtime because your department's short-staffed, like many departments are across this country. And the third day, you might be lucky enough to have it off to make it to your kid's ball game or the wedding that you're supposed to go. So it's a family event. And on that fourth day, if you're lucky enough to have that fourth day off, that's the day you should be resting, getting your mind ready to go back to work. But nope, you've got your chores that you got to do at home. You've got to, you got your homework to do. And some of our officers have second jobs or they're going to school. So really those 4 days off aren't really days off. They're just opportunities for you to be busier doing other things. So, mental health had a lot to do. Now that I've been through some counseling sessions, I know self-care is a big component of mental health. So my advice to people that find themselves being complacent, it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you're not a good officer. It's because you're distracted and you're focused on getting to the next call or doing another activity. A lot of that gets eliminated when you care for yourself. So when you're fine, when Larry Peyton, Kristen, Jauregui, Aram, Choe is fine, when things at home are good, when your finances are good, when your relationship is good, when your relationship with God is good, that translates to how you perform in the field. You're no longer looking for that shortcut to get to the next call. Now it's like, hey, I'm here present. I'm in the now. Let's take care of this now and do the steps I need to take. All three of us have over 20 years on the job. I'm in my 23rd year of my career. What's helped me from not being complacent is I've had the opportunity to move around. I've done patrol for a couple years at a time before I moved to a specialized unit and go back to patrol. So yeah, it's nice to have that change. So if you're from one of those agencies where you can have change and bounce around, I recommend doing that. Absolutely. Try something that you wouldn't normally do.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I've always found it so interesting to have to go start at the bottom and learn again just to work your way up. I mean, it sounds horrifying, but they constantly learning and evolving is so important to vacate the stagnation. I think the stagnation a lot of times is what leads to complacency as well, is that you've done the same thing for 21 years, worked that street, worked that neighborhood, worked that patrol, and these people, that's when things can really go south.
And that's what, dispatchers, for instance, for a lot of dispatch centers, that position that you're in is the position you're going to be in for the rest of your career.
Wow. Yeah, it's stagnant. There's no moving. So, and I mean, I could be a trainer, but I've already done that, and I don't want to do that. And then, being a manager. But in our department, you don't move around. So I'd be stuck on weekend graveyard for the rest of my career. And it's not worth it to me. No. So just to enter some numbers in some books, I'm like, no, that's not for me. So it's pretty stagnant in dispatch. Like, I'm glad that you guys get to move around, and sometimes I'm very envious, and I give my husband and Aram a ton of crap for it because I'm like, oh yeah, you had a hard day doing this. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Meanwhile, I'm tethered to a desk getting yelled at for 13 hours. Yeah. So
it's definitely a job I couldn't do.
No way.
Yeah. So 23 years of 13 hours of the same stuff, it gets a little redundant and kind of over it.
And then you got to go home and be a mom and a wife, and Kristen's got a ton of other activities that she does too. So she travels the country teaching resiliency training. So that's why when I referred to her as being in her wheelhouse, it really is. There's no other authority higher than training for this sort of stuff in our field than the FBI, and we're lucky enough to have Kristen have gone to that training and now teach it. So
Absolutely.
It's helped me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's helped
the
me.
healthiest thing is just to find like an outside hobby
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with work,
Right.
that you just find joy in, and that you look forward to.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more on that, Kristen, because I think that's a fatal flaw that a lot of police officers make, is because the job becomes everything. Aram, like you just said, those 4 days off, what are you doing? Pretty much still the job. And it's all the job. It's all the job. You end up talking to a lot of guys and girls that you work with because they're the only ones you can really talk about, the investigations that are going on, or the crap that's in your head, what happened. They get it. Your dark, really dark sense of humor, they get it. And so you're always surrounded by the job. And then there comes that day that you retire. Right. And I think there's a lot of members that all of a sudden wonder, why is it that I've been divorced twice? What is it I'm going to do with myself? And I don't know what it's like down there, but the rate up here is staggering of police officers, the amount of lifespan, the short amount of lifespan they have from retirement to when they pass away. Yeah. And I think that's a big thing, Kristen, is they just honestly don't know who they are anymore. It's this sort of little thing in the back of your mind, as much as you tell yourself that's not real, but your subconscious, you're like, yeah, this just is not going to be able to work without me. Like, this is, I'm big to this. And then all of a sudden you find out it's running without you. Yeah, I think a lot of members don't deal well with that. And then, like I said, don't know what to do with themselves anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that peer support needs to focus on as well. And I know there's some that do, but it's on the retirement portion of the community because, like you said, they're go, 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 and it's their identity. And then once they retire, the friendships don't happen anymore. You hardly hear from a lot of the people that you thought were close friends. Depending on how devoted they were to work, their kids aren't there for them because that person wasn't around during their whole childhood growing up because they needed that retirement or they needed that payout. Like you said, they're divorced, a few times over. So when they go home, all of a sudden it's going at 100 miles an hour and then now it's nothing. Right. So now what do they do? Right. So that's another factor of peer support that needs to focus on your retirees and their plan for what are you going to do when all of this starts coming to a slow or a stop.
Yeah, I want to bring up a point that you brought up about identity, Larry, and for our young people entering this career and even their spouses, because we have so many people that identify as a police spouse. That's who they are now. And this is the thing, for me at least, how I've managed my sanity, because when we get to we're getting close to an hour, so we're gonna have to continue a second episode. One of these days, I'd love to have you back. I'll talk a little bit about my trauma in my life, but one of the things that kept me sane is being a police officer is not who I am. It's what I do. It's my job. It's my profession. It's my calling. I'm honored to do it. I still think it's one of the most noble professions out there. But it doesn't identify who Aram Choe is. So if you ask who Aram Choe is, I am a believer. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a friend. And I'm very passionate about what I do. I've molded my whole social media personality around this. But you got to really separate the job from who you are. And if you can't think, and when someone says, who is Larry Peyton, and the only thing you can say is I'm a police officer, then we have to do some soul searching, right? So for Joe Smith out there or Jane Doe out there, if you're new in this career, thinking about entering this career, really honor the profession by doing a good job at it. You have to be passionate about it, but think about what you bring to the table. What you bring to the table is who you are. That's actually who you are. That's your character, your competence, and your credibility, all molded into your profession. That's what you devote to the profession. But who you are at the end of the day is Aram Choe, Kristen, and Larry Peyton. And so I want our audience to know that. And I think most police officers agree with me in the fact that this is not my identity. That's why when you walk into a room, you always hear, "Oh, police officer, don't arrest me." You hear that, the wisecracks. It's like, it's not that funny to us because it's not who we are. It's what we do. So, yeah.
I don't even like donuts.
I'd skip it if I can.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I do love donuts, but I'm a foodie. I like food. But that's an episode for a different day.
Different one.
Yeah, but I want. This has been really insightful, Larry. I realized that there was going to be some differences, but what's really brought us together is the human element, and we talked about that earlier. Deep down to our core, we're all really the same people, but we all struggle with the same things. PTSD is the name of your podcast, the Papa Sierra Tango Delta podcast, and we barely scratched the surface on that. But I'd love to have you back because I think after an hour we tend to lose our audience. But would you be interested in coming back?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Of course. Yeah.
Cool. And if our audience, our 911 Strong audience, wants to hear more and see more about Larry Peyton, where can they find you?
Track me down again at the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, PTSD Podcast. You can send me an email. I'm even on TikTok now. I'm not very good at the TikTok, but I'm trying.
Sure.
And any of your podcast services, you'll be able to track it down. And
awesome.
The only thing I'll say is that anyone who wants to talk and would love to come on and tell their story about their struggle would absolutely make the time to talk and be open with each other. And you may be surprised at who else you're helping.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Aram. Thanks, Kristen. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you guys today. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure having you on. All right, well, that ends it for this episode of the 911 Strong podcast and the PTSD podcast. If you liked this episode and you want to hear more, you can log on to the 911strong.com website. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and even TikTok. And you can find us wherever fine podcasts are played. And tell your friends about us, because we'd love to get your word of mouth out there, because we don't really advertise. Our best advertisement is you. So we want to thank you again from the bottom of our hearts, and we'll catch you next time. See you later.
Bye.